Hi folks, David Jameson here, editor of Contour.Scot. Just after hearing the news that Jeremy Corbyn, former leader of the Labour Party, has been suspended from the party for defending his conduct in the wake of the Equality and Human Rights Commission report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I'm joined to talk about this by Stella Rooney. How's it going?
Good.
And well, as good as things
I
could
know,
be
yeah.
under the circumstances. And Stella was a Labour Party member for 2 years and was a Momentum organiser in the last general election. I think that this is a vitally important moment in British politics. I think a lot of people, particularly people who perhaps like me, were never in the Labour Party and never in that tradition, I think could see this as, well, this is kind of old news. Jeremy Corbyn's no longer leader of the Labour Party. As far as I'm concerned, his victimisation is a vitally important political question because it will impact everyone on the left if we simply let it slide and we don't act in solidarity. Just to quickly relate the situation, the Equality and Human Rights Commission has reported that there were a series of failures inside the Labour Party in terms of handling complaints of anti-Semitism, and it levelled accusations of interference in that process by the leadership office. A few things that we know about this whole situation is, one, that the vast majority of complaints of anti-Semitism were fraudulent. In fact, most of them were made against people who were not members of the Labour Party. Second, that members of the Labour Party machine who were anti-Corbyn deliberately obstructed the process of handling complaints in order to undermine Corbyn. We know this because of leaks from the Labour Party in subsequent months. I'm sure everyone watching this would agree with me that there is no room for anti-Semitism or racism of any kind on the left, and that there were real incidents of anti-Semitism, and that when there are those real incidences, they should always be dealt with as seriously and quickly as possible. That's a basic act of solidarity and anti-racism. But there's also absolutely no question that this was ramped up into an orchestrated campaign against Jeremy Corbyn, against the left, against people with the best records of anti-racism, including Corbyn himself. And I think this is borne out by his suspension today by the Labour leadership. So first of all, Stella, how should we understand the suspension, and how should people on the left react to it?
I think this is very significant from a couple of reasons, but I think one of the main things is it's obviously so shocking. It was not a move that anyone predicted was going to happen, and many people have asked, why. It doesn't even really, it's something that's deliberately going to provoke the left. It's going to cause a lot of anger. So that's something to consider as well. I think it's really important that we extend solidarity to Corbyn and to anyone who may be subsequently suspended after this, because ultimately I think this is about weaponising the issue of anti-Semitism that doesn't deal with the issue itself and using it as, something to hurt the left with. And I think they do that because Jeremy Corbyn's politics are ultimately quite powerful and they're threatening.
Yeah, and I think that, this is something that now goes way beyond the Labour Party. I think that there has been a failure to stand up to this process before now. I think now is the optimal time to turn that around. The way it's always been with this is they know that accusations of racism, accusations of reactionary politics can split the left because it uses the left's own best instincts against itself. People on the left are dedicated to fighting racism, any form of reactionary politics, And so whereas in the past, leftists would be accused of being, say, puppets for Jewish interests, today they have to be accused of being anti-Semites. And that is, a broader social change. But it is unquestionably how they have weaponized these accusations against Corbyn and the left. I also think this is a huge blow for anti-racism.
Definitely.
There aren't a wealth of forces in society who are prepared to take a principled, consistent stand that aren't broadly the left. It's the left which has consistently stood with oppressed communities on these very issues. And so, as I say, I think it's a basic responsibility now to stand with Jeremy Corbyn.
I think that's very true about it being a blow for anti-racism. And if you look at, all of the information that's come out about the Labour Party on the various reports, it was clearly not just the issue of anti-Semitism that the party was not able to deal with. It was not able to deal with racism or sexual assault or multiple different ways that people are discriminated against. Like, the complaint procedure was not fit for purpose, and obviously it's been clearly pointed out that since 2018 the process has become a lot better, and it's not perfect at all, but there are improvements there. And yeah, I think ultimately as well that Jeremy Corbyn is one of the last politicians who are fiercely anti-racist. Like, he is, in his entire life, everything he has done, there is so much evidence that he is a staunch anti-racist, and he actually cares about imperialism as well. And obviously these are issues that don't get talked about. Obviously people throw around stuff like racism and sexism, etc., all the time, but we don't get to the root. We don't get to the actual principle and the politics of that in mainstream kind of discussion on it. But Jeremy Corbyn has shown through action, and not just through saying I hate racism. In his action, in his life, he has shown he's an anti-racist, and that's ultimately threatening, because the way that Britain is run is predicated on structural racism and imperialism. So
including under previous Labour governments, like those by Tony Blair, which we might return to. I saw a tweet earlier by Jacob Bard Rosenberg, who's one of the editors of the Jewish Socialist magazine, and he made precisely this point. He said that the next time I see Jeremy Corbyn, it will probably be on an anti-racist march. I'll be there, he'll be there, and none of the people in the media, in the Labour Party, who are so hot on resisting Jeremy Corbyn's racism today will be on that demonstration. I think that's a really good point. Like you said, he's one of the last politicians who is organically from those anti-racist movements, who is organically from the movement against apartheid in South Africa, who is organically from part of that tradition of Cable Street, part of that tradition of anti-fascism. How many of these people who are accusing Jeremy Corbyn of being an anti-Semite have ever stood in a Jewish community or a Muslim community and resisted a march by the National Front or the BNP or the EDL? They have absolutely no background in resisting racism. And this is this whole thing with, I already see some SNP politicians saying, chucking Corbyn under a bus, say they're progressive, they're not at all, and saying, we need to talk about racism, right? We do need to talk about racism, but that's not the politics of anti-racism. Let's be clear, it actually involves a personal commitment. It actually involves political action. And that's what Corbyn's actually done throughout his career. He's followed up talk with action, which has undermined his career. He sat on the back benches for decades because he was the sort of person who was willing to stand up for immigrant communities. He was willing to stand up against the far right. That's why he was on the back benches.
I think it's all this talk about people being like, oh, it's all about how people feel, and obviously seeing stuff that, can be upsetting. Like, I get upset, sometimes when I read stuff, and that's a normal human response, but it's not, it can be channeled into political response. But politics isn't just about how you feel. It's about what you do about it. And these people are like, oh yeah, we just need to sit and talk about this. Well, you know, the best leader we've ever had as the Labour Party, staunch anti-racist, has been accused of being an anti-Semite and has been suspended from the party. Like, it is not the time to sit and talk about how we feel. It is the time to show solidarity, and ultimately talking about how you feel. Like, it doesn't get fascists off the street. It doesn't challenge racist attitudes in your workplace or in your family. That's about doing work and standing up to things. And some of these people, I just really don't think have, you know, a single, you know, they don't have the bottle to do that.
No, of course not. I mean, the contrast between the sort of left-wing politics represented by Jeremy Corbyn, which is committed to a lifetime of activism, and the careerist, throwaway, social media era, you know, people call it virtue signaling, you know, just sending out these sort of messaging, political messaging, PR instead of politics. They're not fit to tie shoelaces. But, you know, Tony Blair is still in the Labour Party. Tony Blair, who is one of the most important figures in the history of racism in modern Britain, one of the people most responsible for the proliferation of Islamophobia in this country, who demonized the Muslim community, who joined the tabloid press and the far right in those attacks, who instigated many of those attacks, who his Home Secretary erected surveillance programs against the Muslim community, which are still going on today, like Prevent. There's no investigation about that in the Labour Party, that the British state is still spying on minority, ethnic and religious and racial groups, still spying in their communities. That's not considered racism. What Corbyn was actually expelled for, we should remember, isn't his conduct, you know, not anything that went on in the Labour Party in the last few years. It was making a statement where he said anti-Semitism is wrong, there were failures, but I believe that this has been weaponized, as it clearly has been, against the left. That's why he's been expelled for that, suspended rather, for that statement. And meanwhile, we still have the Labour Party full of the ghouls who enacted actively racist policies under the Tony Blair and Gordon Brown governments.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, like, this continues. It is like, some people, you know, are be like, oh, the left only batter Blair, but there's plenty more. And there's also the relics of this behaviour undermined this kind of ideology, undermined the 2017 election, and still nothing has really been done about that. In fact, people who were directly involved in that are still working in the Labour movement in positions. And yeah, I mean, like, it's just such a phony attempt to tackle this. You know, the people who made Diane Abbott cry in a bathroom, or, like, you know, deliberately went after Black women MPs, like, that's racism in action, that's misogyny in action, but there's no consequences. In terms of, like, the specific statement that Jeremy put out as well, it's like, it's difficult to comprehend the logic behind the suspension from that. What I would guess is that perhaps all MPs were told, don't comment on this, and he obviously did. Not a reason to suspend somebody, obviously, but I'm just figuring out the logic. Other thing as well is, like, it is essential to Starmer's whole strategy is to just be like, you know, kind of just do a lot of grovelling. Like, it's like, we are just so sorry for this, and just not even actually explaining anything, just kind of like whatever people accuse the Labour Party of a Corbyn's leadership of, they will just say sorry for, which is obviously a terrible strategy. And I'm sure many people listening to this will not be massive fans of Keir Starmer, but that is ultimately pretty doomed, because all you're going to do is end up you know, admitting to things that didn't actually happen, like then being forced to argue that Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite. It's insane.
Yeah, it's cynical and unbelievable. And I think I mean, finally, I think that everyone on the left basically needs to express solidarity, and it's nothing to do with whether or not you agree with the politics of the Labour left or Corbyn or whatever, whether you see yourself as to the right of him or to the left of him, or simply have a different view on organisational politics or how we should do left-wing politics or whatever. If you allow the most famous left-wing person in the country to be victimised in this way, with horrendous false accusations being made against him, the claim even that he is himself an anti-Semite, an active anti-Semite, if you allow that smear to rest, it will be used against anyone else on the left whenever the right want to sort someone out, whether it's a trade unionist or a community campaigner or a tenants unionist or someone in the Green Party or someone in any political organisation. Like, if you let the most famous socialist in the country be crushed, then you're making a rod for your own back. And for some people, like the careerists and stuff, that doesn't matter because they don't see themselves as part of the left. They see themselves as pursuing a salary and a name and a profile. Let them do that. But the actual, like, people who have any sense of a commitment to a progressive politics, an anti-racist politics, a politics of solidarity, have to rally around Corbyn now, I think.
Definitely. And I think it's very true. Like, it's not about whether you were a member of the Labour Party or you voted Labour or etc., or you support parliamentary road to socialism. Ultimately, whether you agree with Corbyn's tactics or every decision his leadership made, I certainly didn't. But ultimately, it's really important because if we want to do anything that was part of his manifesto in Scotland, whether that's independent, etc., we're going to be faced with very, very similar attacks. Like, we're going to be attacked. We saw a very small part of that, perhaps in comparison to what Corbyn got in 2014 in the referendum.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are going to be hit, especially if our vision is about economic change, is about reshaping the economy for and in the interests of workers and the majority of people. So ultimately, we have to sit down and be like, this man, whether you agree with him or not, is clearly not an anti-Semite. He may have made decisions that were wrong, like bad calls. You can say that in a report. But ultimately, this is an attack on all of us because Jeremy Corbyn, whether you agree with him or not, is a thoroughly good man. He's a principled man. He's an anti-racist. And he's just a good person as well, who is thoroughly, like, in his way he lives his life, a socialist, thoroughly kind, thoroughly good-natured. And I think these attacks will come for us as well. And we have to be able to stand up against them, and we have to be able to show our solidarity to Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, thanks very much, Stella, for speaking to me about this today. Shell-shocked and angry, though we are.
So angry.
But yeah, we'll keep covering this at Content.Scot and look forward to hearing any wider discussions on the left about defending Jeremy Corbyn, which I'm sure we'll all want to be part of. I'll speak to you all soon.